My name is Arthur Coleman. By formal training, I am a historian, specializing in the industrial and labor histories of British Columbia. This background, however, did not prepare me for my current employment. To fund my doctoral research, I have taken a position as the night warden for the Britannia Mine Museum, a sprawling national historic site located on the sea to Sky Highway. It is a place of immense historical significance. Once the most productive copper mine in the entire British Commonwealth, a self-contained company town that was home to tens of thousands over its 70-year lifespan. The interview for this post was unconventional. The museum director, a gaunt, wary man named Abernathy, seemed less interested in my qualifications than in my capacity for absolute obedience. He stressed that the position required an individual capable of following a precise set of instructions without question. At the time, I dismissed his intensity as eccentricity, a peculiar form of hazing for the new hire. He gave me a key, a meager salary offer that was nonetheless more than I could refuse, and a single laminated sheet of paper. The night warden's mandates, he called them. They are not negotiable. That first night, as the last of the day, shift staff departed, and a profound, almost suffocating silence descended upon the valley. I sat in the small security office and examined the list. The air grew cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine from the surrounding mountains. The immense 20-story frame of Mill 3, the primary ore concentrator, loomed outside my window like a skeletal behemoth against the darkening sky. It was in that oppressive quiet that I first read the rules that would come to govern my existence. I transcribed them here for you, exactly as they were written. The night warden's mandates. Britannia Mine Museum 1. Your shift begins at 22:500. Do not enter Mill 3 before 22:30. The day shift needs time to leave. All of it. 2. At 8:45, check the seismograph in the main office. If it registers tremors despite no local earthquakes, go to the incline camp display and wait. They are moving the mountain again. You don't want to be in their way. 3. You will hear children playing near the forest edge after 0100. They are from Jane Camp. Do not look at them. Their game is tag, and if they see you, you are. 4. If you hear boots stomping in the main transport tunnel, turn off your headlamp and press yourself into an alcove. They are looking for their shift leader from the 1921 flood. Do not let them mistake you for him. 5. The woman in the customs house is harmless, but lonely. If she appears, compliment her dress. Do not mention the water stains on the hem. 6. Never, under any circumstances, answer a voice that calls your name from a lower level. It is not your colleague. It is something that wants you to come down. 7. Your shift ends at 0600. No matter what is happening, be outside the main gate before the sun clears the peak of Mount Sheer. The things in the dark are afraid of the light, but the things in the rock are not. I read the list twice, a bemused smile touching my lips. It was elaborate, certainly. A well-crafted piece of workplace folklore designed to spook the new guy. Jane Camp, I knew from my research, was the uppermost mining camp, destroyed in a horrific avalanche in March 1915 that killed 56 men, women, and children. The 1921 flood was another of the mine's great tragedies, a wall of water and debris that tore through the lower town site, killing 37. The rules were a ghost tour in miniature, weaving the site's documented disasters into a narrative of caution. It was clever. It was also, I assumed, complete nonsense. Still, a job was a job, and Mr. Abernathy's unnerving seriousness echoed in my mind. I decided to humor the tradition. At 2200 on the dot, I locked the office and began my first patrol. The sheer scale of the place at night was humbling. The museum encompasses 10 acres of land, a collection of heritage buildings connected by gravel paths and old railway lines. For most of its history, this community was profoundly isolated, accessible only by steamship on Howe Sound, a world unto itself. That sense of isolation remained palpable. There was no traffic noise from the highway, only the whisper of wind through the skeletal superstructure of the mills and the distant, constant rush of Britannia Creek. I checked the locks on the beady London Visitor Centre, the doors of the Chatterbox Cafe, and the gate to the gold panning pavilion. Everything was secure. My footsteps crunched loudly on the gravel, the only sound in a silent world. I kept an eye on my watch. The first rule stipulated I was not to enter Mill 3 before 22:30. It was the centerpiece of the entire site, a colossal, 20-story gravity-fed concentrator built directly into the steep hillside. It looked less like a building and more like a concrete and steel waterfall, frozen in time. A tomb. I waited, feeling foolish, pacing the area in front of its immense, dark entrance. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. At 22:31, I took a deep breath, switched on my heavy-duty flashlight, and stepped inside. The beam cut a bright, lonely path through an abyss of darkness. The air inside was thick and cold, heavy with the metallic scent of old machinery, and something else, something like damp, disturbed earth. The acoustics were cathedral-like. Every scuff of my boot, every rustle of my jacket, echoed up into the vast, unseen heights of the structure. I followed the designated patrol route, a metal catwalk that snaked past enormous, silent rock crushers and flotation cells. It was a city of ghosts, a mechanical graveyard where the specter of industry lingered. I spent over an hour inside, my initial amusement slowly giving way to a profound sense of unease. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was the weight of the place. The weight of the 210 kilometers of tunnels, honeycombing the mountain beneath my feet, a hollowed-out labyrinth stretching from 1,100 meters up the mountain down to 650 meters below sea level. I thought of the thousands of men who had toiled in those tunnels, the cacophony of the drills, the explosions, the constant danger. Now, there was only silence, a silence that felt watchful. I completed my patrol of the upper grounds, the various outbuildings and historical displays feeling increasingly remote and lonely under the cold starlight. The night was clear, and the mountains ringing Howe Sound were sharp, dark silhouettes. It was beautiful and terrifyingly empty. As the clock on my phone ticked past midnight, I found myself walking back toward the main office complex. It was almost 00:45. Time to check the seismograph, as per Rule Fade 2. I scoffed at myself. I was actually following this ridiculous script. It was a list of rules. Absurd, of course. But in the crushing silence of that valley, with a mountain of hollowed-out earth beneath my feet, absurdity felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. The main office was housed in one of the preserved heritage buildings, its interior a faithful recreation of a 1950s administrative hub. The air inside was stale, smelling of old paper and varnish. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor as I made my way to the corner where a collection of geological instruments was displayed behind a velvet rope. Among them was the seismograph, an archaic-looking device with a drum of paper and a resting needle. It was as expected, perfectly still. I pulled out my phone, my reflection a pale, distorted mask on the dark screen. Aldo 1044, 1 minute to go. I felt a fresh wave of foolishness wash over me. I was a doctoral candidate, a man of facts and figures, standing in a museum in the middle of the night, waiting for a ghost story to come true. I checked the official provincial seismology network on my phone. No scheduled blasting. No tectonic activity reported anywhere in the region. The silence in the office was absolute, broken only by the low hum of a vintage electric clock on the wall. The second hand swept past the 12. It was others in 45. Nothing happened. The needle on the seismograph remained motionless. The clock hummed. The silence held. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, a short, sharp laugh escaping with it. Of course. What had I expected? I had let the oppressive atmosphere of this place, this giant, hollowed-out mountain, get the better of me. I was about to turn and leave when a faint scratching sound reached my ears. It was the needle. It was dragging across the paper. I stared, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. It wasn't a violent swing, but a slow, deliberate tremor. A deep, rhythmic pulse that vibrated up from the floor, through the soles of my boots, and into my bones. It was a low, frequency thrumming, more felt than heard, like a giant lung slowly inhaling somewhere deep within the earth. The needle traced a steady, undulating line on the paper drum. My hands shook as I refreshed the government website. Still nothing. No earthquakes. This was localized. It was happening right here, right under my feet. They are moving the mountain again. You don't want to be in their way. Rule Fei 2 was no longer a quirky piece of folklore. It was an instruction, a vital, terrifying instruction. I had to get to the incline camp display. I burst out of the office, the night air feeling shockingly cold against my flushed skin. I didn't run. Panic felt like a luxury that would attract attention. But my pace was urgent, my heavy work boots crunching frantically on the gravel path. The incline camp display was on the other side of the main plaza, an outdoor exhibit recreating one of the camps that had clung to the mountainside, serviced by a steep railway. The thrumming intensified as I crossed the open ground. It was a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my skull. A grinding, groaning protest from the very bedrock of the valley. I could feel the immense weight of the mountain above me, the 210 kilometers of empty tunnels like a network of hollow bones in a sleeping giant that was beginning to stir. I imagined the rock faces deep underground, scraping against each other, shifting by millimeters that translated into this earth, shaking vibration on the surface. I reached the display, a mock-up of a miner's shack next to a section of steep track. As per the rule, I just had to wait. I huddled close to the wooden wall of the shack, making myself as small as possible, my eyes scanning the colossal, shadowed form of Mill 3. The structure groaned, its steel frame contracting and expanding with the vibrations, the sound like the slow, pained sigh of a dying beast. The ground beneath me was vibrating so intensely now that it was hard to stand still. It felt like being on the deck of a massive ship in a heavy sea. I didn't see anything. There was no grand spectacle, no collapsing rock faces or visible phenomena. It was worse. It was the raw, unseen power of it. The chillingly methodical sound of something of impossible size and strength rearranging the very foundations of the world around me. It lasted for what felt like an eternity, but the clock on my phone showed it was only 3 minutes. Then, as slowly as it began, the thrumming subsided. The vibrations faded, the groaning of the mill ceased, and the profound, suffocating silence of the valley rushed back in to fill the void. I remained frozen for a full minute after it stopped, my body trembling uncontrollably. My academic curiosity had evaporated, replaced by a primal, gut-wrenching fear. The rules were real. Every single one of them was real, and I had just survived the second. My patrol route was a mockery now. This wasn't about checking locks anymore. It was about navigating a minefield of spectral triggers. With a new, horrifying clarity, I looked at my watch. It was 0113, Rule Fane 3. You will hear children playing near the forest edge after 0100. They are from Jane Camp. Do not look at them. Their game is tag, and if they see you, you are eat, as if on cue. A sound drifted on the wind from the dark tree line that bordered the museum grounds. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of leaves. But then it came again, clearer this time. Louder. The high-pitched, carefree laughter of children. My blood ran cold. Jane Camp, the highest settlement, wiped out by the 1915 avalanche. 56 dead, men, women, and children, buried under tons of snow and rock, some never found. I knew the history. I had read the accounts. But reading about a tragedy and hearing its echo a century later were two vastly different things. I forced myself to keep moving, my gaze locked on the gravel path in front of me. Do not look at them. The laughter grew louder, closer. It was accompanied by the patter of small, running feet on damp earth and fallen leaves. A girl's voice, clear as a bell, squealed, "You can't catch me!" followed by a boy's gleeful shout. The sounds were so full of life, so innocent, that it was almost impossible to reconcile them with the chilling reality of their origin. My every instinct screamed at me to look, to turn my head towards the source of the sound. It was a deeply ingrained human response to identify a sound, to assess a potential threat or presence. But Abernathy's warning and the vibrating earth beneath my feet were still fresh in my mind. I clenched my fists, my knuckles white, and focused on placing one foot in front of the other. A twig snapped just to my left, in the darkness beyond the path. "Ready or not, here I come," a small voice whispered, seemingly right beside my ear. I flinched violently, a strangled cry catching in my throat, but I did not turn my head. I could feel their presence, a cold spot in the air, the sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Their game was tag, and I was trespassing on their playground. The urge to look was a physical force, a magnetic pull on my senses. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, focusing on the single, repeating mandate in my head, "Do not look." I walked faster, moving away from the forest's edge and towards the gaping maw of the main transport tunnel, the next checkpoint on my route. The sounds of the children's game slowly faded behind me, replaced once more by the rush of Britannia Creek and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I had passed another test. I paused at the entrance to the tunnel to catch my breath, leaning against the cold, damp rock. The beam of my flashlight cut a stark white hole in an oppressive, absolute blackness. This tunnel was a major artery of the mine, wide enough for the electric ore trains that once rumbled through here day and night. Now its silence was heavy, expectant. Rule Feint 4. If you hear boots stomping in the main transport tunnel, turn off your headlamp and press yourself into an alcove. They are looking for their shift leader from the 1921 flood. Do not let them mistake you for him. As my breathing began to steady, I heard it. A new sound emerging from the depths of the tunnel. It wasn't the playful patter of children's feet. This was heavy, rhythmic. The sound of work boots, thick with mud and water, stomping in unison on the rock floor. Slosh, stomp, stomp. There was no time to think. I flicked my headlamp off, plunging myself into terrifying, disorienting darkness. My hands scrambled against the rough, hewn wall of the tunnel, searching for an alcove, one of the small safety cutouts for workers to avoid the passing trains. My fingers brushed against empty air. An opening. I threw myself into it, pressing my back against the cold, wet stone, trying to make myself disappear. The stomping grew louder, echoing horribly in the confined space. It was the sound of a dozen men, maybe more, marching with grim purpose. As they drew nearer, other sounds emerged from the darkness. The clink of metal tools, the low, mournful murmur of voices, too indistinct to make out words, but heavy with exhaustion and despair. A smell washed over me, the scent of river mud, of decay, of the deep, cold, wet places of the earth. The 1921 flood, a wall of water and debris that had torn through the lower town site, killing 37. They were still on their way to work, or perhaps on their way back from it. Slosh, stomp, slosh, stomp. They were passing my alcove now. I held my breath, my body rigid, my mind screaming. I could feel the chill of their passage, a wave of profound cold that had nothing to do with the tunnel's temperature. I fought the urge to peek, to catch a glimpse of the spectral miners. The thought of being mistaken for their shift leader, of being seen and dragged with them into whatever watery hell they were eternally marching towards, was more terrifying than any darkness. The stomping receded down the tunnel, the dreadful, rhythmic sound slowly swallowed by the distance. I stayed pressed into the alcove, shaking in the pitch black for a long, long time after the last echo had faded. The historian who had arrived for his shift hours ago, amused by a list of silly rules, was gone. In his place was a man who understood, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that he was a trespasser in a world governed by the dead. And the only thing keeping him alive was the laminated paper in his pocket. I don't know how long I remained crammed in that stone alcove, enveloped by a darkness so complete it felt like a physical substance. Minutes, an hour. Time had lost its meaning, replaced by the frantic, irregular rhythm of my own breathing. The phantom chill of the miner's passage lingered, a damp cold that had settled deep in my bones. My academic detachment, my historical curiosity, it had all been scarred away, leaving behind the raw, animal instinct to survive. The laminated card in my pocket felt impossibly heavy, a talisman of terrible power. It was no longer a list of quirky rules. It was a catechism for survival in a haunted world. Eventually, the need to keep moving overrode the paralysis of fear. I fumbled for my headlamp, my fingers clumsy and numb. The beam flickered on, painfully bright, chasing the absolute darkness back into the deep recesses of the transport tunnel. I stumbled out of the alcove, my legs unsteady, and forced myself to continue my patrol. My route would now take me out of the main industrial area and down towards the cluster of heritage buildings. On the lower town site, near the shore of Howe Sound, the path descended and the air changed. The oppressive weight of the mountain and the metallic tang of the mill lessened, replaced by the salty, damp scent of the Sound. Here, the buildings were smaller, more human scale. Restored houses, the old company store, and the customs house. According to the museum literature, the customs house now served as a small art gallery, a quiet, contemplative space. A bitter irony, considering its location in the heart of the area devastated by the 1921 flood. As I approached, I saw a soft light glowing in one of the windows. It wasn't the harsh, electric light of a security lamp, but a warm, flickering luminescence like that of an oil lamp. My heart seized. I knew what this meant. Rule 85. The woman in the customs house is harmless, but lonely. If she appears, compliment her dress. Do not mention the water stains on the hem. Harmless. The word seemed absurd in this place. After the earth-shaking tremors and the spectral procession, the concept of a harmless ghost was difficult to process, but the rule was explicit. This was a social call, not a flight for survival. A test of etiquette, not endurance. I took a deep, shuddering breath and pushed open the door. It was unlocked. The interior was just as the brochure described, a modest gallery space with paintings by local artists hanging on the walls. But the warm, flickering light I had seen from outside cast strange, dancing shadows that made the serene landscapes on the canvases seem menacing. And there, standing in the center of the main room, was a woman. She was turned away from me, seemingly admiring a painting of the coastline. She was tall and slender, her hair pinned up in an elegant, old-fashioned style. She wore a long, dark skirt and a high, collared blouse, the kind of attire one might see in photographs from the early 1920s. She was perfectly still, her posture radiating a profound and timeless melancholy. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice a dry rasp. She turned, slowly. Her face was pale and beautiful, but her eyes held a sorrow so deep it was like looking into a well. She didn't seem surprised to see me. She simply looked at me, her gaze distant, as if seeing through me to a time long past. I remembered the rule. My eyes flickered down to her dress. It was a beautiful garment, made of a rich, dark fabric. And there, just as the rule had warned, was the stain. A dark, irregular watermark creeping up the hem of her skirt, as if she had been wading through a flood. It was faint, but undeniable. "Do not mention the water stains on the hem. I just wanted to say," I stammered, forcing my gaze back up to her face, "that is a very beautiful dress." For a moment, she remained silent, her sorrowful eyes fixed on mine. Then, a faint, sad smile touched her lips. It was a smile of heartbreaking loneliness, a fleeting moment of connection in an eternity of solitude. She didn't speak a word. She simply inclined her head in a gesture of quiet acknowledgement, a ghost of gratitude. And then she faded. She didn't vanish in a flash, but dissolved like smoke, the warm lamplight fading with her, until I was left standing alone in the cold, dark gallery, the only light coming from my own headlamp. I backed out of the customs house, my heart aching with a strange mix of terror and pity. Harmless, yes. But her loneliness was a palpable force, an emotional residue that clung to the air like the scent of rain. The rest of the lower patrol passed in a blur of dread. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. I was constantly checking my watch, the numbers glowing with malevolent significance. The night was wearing on, but dawn still felt a lifetime away. I found myself near the base of Mill 3 again, near a grated opening that led down into one of the deeper, sub-level pump houses. The air wafting up from it was cold and smelled of deep earth and stagnant water. The mine extended hundreds of meters below sea level here, a lightless, flooded labyrinth kept at bay only by the constant work of modern pumps. That's when I heard it. "Arthur." The voice was faint, echoing up from the grated opening. It was a man's voice, and it sounded familiar. It sounded like Mr. Abernathy. I froze, my light fixed on the grate. "Hello," I almost called back, the word forming on my lips before I caught myself. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. Had he come back for some reason? Was he checking on me? "Arthur, is that you? I seem to have had a bit of a fall down here. I think my leg is broken." The voice was strained, full of pain, but it was unmistakably Abernathy's voice. A wave of concern washed over me, momentarily eclipsing my fear. He was my employer. He was hurt. I took a step towards the grate, ready to call down, to promise help was on the way. And then, the 6th rule slammed into my consciousness with the force of a physical blow. Rule Phase 6. Never, under any circumstances, answer a voice that calls your name from a lower level. It is not your colleague. It is something that wants you to come down. I recoiled from the grate as if it were red hot. It couldn't be. It sounded so real, so full of genuine pain and fear. "Arthur, please." The voice pleaded from the darkness below. It's cold down here. I can hear the water. Please, just answer me. Let me know you're there." My entire being screamed at me to respond. It was the decent thing to do, the human thing to do. To ignore a cry for help felt monstrous. But the rules had not been wrong yet. The tremors had been real. The children had been real. The miners and the lonely woman had been real. I stood there, paralyzed by a terrible conflict. My humanity versus the stark, insane logic that had kept me alive this far. "I know you're up there," the voice said, its tone shifting. The note of pain was still there, but it was underpinned by something else now. A sly, knowing cadence. "I can hear you breathing. Just one word, Arthur. That's all I need. Just say my name." The blood drained from my face. This wasn't a plea for help. It was a negotiation. An incantation. It wanted permission. Like a vampire at a threshold, it needed to be invited in. My name, my voice, was the key. I squeezed my eyes shut and turned my back on the grate. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it. "Hey, Arch, you are..." The voice was no longer Abernathy's. It was a deep, guttural roar that echoed up from the bowels of the earth, a sound of pure, ancient malice. It was the sound of something that had been trapped in the dark and the deep for a very long time, and it was hungry. I ran. I scrambled away from the grate, away from that terrible, promising sound, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I didn't stop until I was on the far side of the plaza, my back pressed against the cold steel of the massive, retired haulage truck that sat near the museum entrance. The roaring from the grate had faded, replaced again by the steady rush of the creek. But I knew it was still there, waiting, listening. I looked at my watch. 05:42. The sky to the east, over the peak of Mount Shear, was beginning to soften from pitch black to a deep, bruised purple. Dawn was coming, and with it, the final rule, Rule Phase 7. Your shift ends at Euro 6000. No matter what is happening, be outside the main gate before the sun clears the peak of Mount Shear. The things in the dark are afraid of the light, but the things in the rock are not. 18 minutes. I had 18 minutes to get from where I was, through the main gate, and off the property. It should have been plenty of time. But as I looked across the haunted grounds of the Britannia mine, at the skeletal frame of the mill and the dark mouths of the tunnels, I had the distinct feeling that the entire place was now aware of me. I had survived the night. I had followed the rules. But the mine wasn't done with me yet. The final test was about to begin. The cold steel of the massive Wabco haulage truck was a solid, reassuring presence against my back, an anchor in a world that had dissolved into spectral threats and predatory whispers. My gaze was fixed on the eastern sky, where the jagged silhouette of Mount Shear was now sharply defined against a sky bleeding from black to a deep, bruised indigo. My phone's screen glowed with a terrible finale at 05:43. 17 minutes. Rule Phase 7. Your shift ends at 0600. No matter what is happening, be outside the main gate before the sun clears the peak of Mount Shear. The things in the dark are afraid of the light, but the things in the rock are not. The final rule. It wasn't a warning about a specific entity, but a deadline. A race against the dawn itself. But it was the addendum that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The things in the rock are not. I had survived the ghosts of the mine's tragic past, the victims of snow, flood, and darkness. But this last warning implied a different kind of horror, something more ancient and elemental than the spirits of the dead. Something that didn't fear the sun, but welcomed it. I pushed myself off the truck and began to move. The main gate was perhaps 200 meters away, across the main plaza and down a short access road. An easy walk. But as I took my first steps, I knew something was wrong. The gravel path, which had crunched reliably under my boots all night, now felt strangely soft, yielding. Each step required a conscious effort, as if I were walking through thick, dry sand. A new sound began, so low and deep it was almost subliminal. It wasn't the rhythmic thrumming of the mountain being moved, nor the guttural roar from the grate. This was a dry, grinding sound, like immense stones scraping together miles below the earth. It was the sound of the mind's very bones shifting, the sound of a foundation made of shear zones and fractured rock waking from a long slumber. I picked up my pace, breaking into a clumsy jog. The air was still and cold, but the grinding grew louder, resonating in my teeth and the hollows of my chest. I kept my eyes on the gate, but my peripheral vision was playing tricks on me. The hard, industrial lines of the buildings, especially the colossal frame of Mill 3, seemed to shimmer and warp. For a terrifying instant, the 20-story concentrator looked less like a solid structure and more like a heat haze rising from asphalt, its form momentarily losing its integrity. I blinked, shaking my head, attributing it to exhaustion and adrenaline. But the feeling didn't go away. The world was becoming unstable. The sky was brighter now, a palette of pale gray and faint orange. I risked a glance up at the mountain, and then I saw it. A single, brilliant star of light flared into existence on the highest, most jagged point of Mount Shear's peak. The first ray of sun. The moment the light touched the stone, the grinding sound intensified tenfold, becoming a deafening roar that filled the valley. The ground beneath my feet gave a violent lurch, not a tremor, but a sickening, twisting motion, and I fell hard to one knee. The gravel bit into my skin. The things in the rock were awake. Panic, raw and absolute, took hold. I scrambled back to my feet and ran. This was no longer a jog. It was a desperate, panicked sprint for my life. The gate, which had seemed so close, now looked impossibly distant. The very ground seemed to conspire against me. The path felt steeper, the gravel like a grasping tide pulling at my ankles. I could feel the attention of the mountain on me, a vast geological malevolence. It wasn't personal. It was the reflexive, predatory instinct of something ancient and vast, and I was a foreign body on its skin that needed to be crushed. I could see the details of the gate now, the heavy iron bars, the thick chain and padlock I had to open. My lungs burned. My legs were screaming. The grinding sound was everywhere, a physical pressure against my eardrums. I imagined the 10 kilometers of tunnels beneath me constricting, the rock faces pressing in, the entire mountain squeezing like a fist. I reached the gate, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the lock. The metal was vibrating, humming with the deep, resonant power of the rock. The chain rattled against the bars as I fumbled with it. Behind me, the roar of the grinding stone reached a crescendo. I didn't dare look back. The lock clicked open. I tore the chain free and shoved the heavy gate, which screamed in protest on its hinges. I threw myself through the opening, stumbling, falling onto the cool, solid asphalt of the public road outside. I was out. I lay there on the ground, gasping, my body trembling, as the sun's golden light finally spilled over the peak of Mount Shear, bathing the entire valley in the clean, sharp light of a new day. And as the light washed over the mine, the grinding stopped, abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, and somehow more terrifying than the noise it replaced. It was the silence of a predator that had missed its chance and had settled back into a patient, stony slumber. After a minute that felt like an hour, I pushed myself into a sitting position and looked back through the open gate. Everything looked normal. The heritage buildings were bathed in the gentle morning sun. The great, white edifice of Mill 3 stood silent and still against the bluing sky. It was just a museum, a national historic site. But then I saw it. For a single, horrifying heartbeat, the entire concrete face of the 20-story mill seemed to ripple. Like a reflection in disturbed water, its solid form lost all cohesion, wavering as if it were made of liquid stone. Then, just as quickly, it snapped back into sharp, solid focus. The ground just inside the gate settled with a soft whoosh, and a puff of dust, ancient and fine, rose into the still air. I scrambled backwards, away from the gate, my mind reeling. The things in the dark were the echoes of human tragedy. But the things in the rock, they were the mountain itself. And they were hungry. I sat by the side of the road for a long time, watching as the first few cars of the morning commuters began to speed past on the sea to Sky Highway. The world was waking up, oblivious to the ancient, predatory systems that operated just beyond a simple iron gate. I pulled the laminated card from my pocket. It was crumpled and stained with sweat and dirt, but the 7 rules were still legible. They were the only reason I was alive. Any sane person would quit. They would get in their car, drive away, and never look back. They would sacrifice their doctoral research, their funding, their academic career for the simple, precious gift of not having to face that again. But as I sat there, the terror slowly began to recede, replaced by a chilling, obsessive curiosity. I was a historian, and I had just stumbled upon a history that was not written in any book, a living history that unfolded every single night. The mine had secrets, terrible and profound, and I had the key, not just to the gate, but to surviving them. I folded the laminated card carefully and put it back in my pocket. I would be back tonight, and every night after. The fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but the pull of the unknown was stronger. My name is Arthur Coleman, and I work nights at the Britannia mine. The rules are the only reason I'm alive, and tonight my shift begins at 2200.